Daily Detroit takes hours of prep, research, reporting, editing, all of that stuff. It's a lot more than just showing up to a microphone and talking. So your financial support would be greatly appreciated. Patreon.com/Daily Detroit. Local work needs local support to succeed. Our members are help what makes this go. So thank you very much. That's patreon.com/Daily Detroit. Hello, everyone, and welcome to your Daily Detroit, sharing what to know and where to go every single day of the week. I am your every single day of the week host, Jer Stays, and joining me on Wednesdays, a very special person to all of the podcast listeners, Norris Howard. How are you?
How's it going? How's it going, everybody? What's up, Jer? Thanks for having me, as always.
And here's the thing. I don't care about population, where people, all the other data stuff you'll see on X and Facebook and social media, whatever. Metro Detroit is one of the best news towns in America because there is always so much interesting stuff to talk about.
Yeah, and people have a tendency to do really stupid stuff in Southeast Michigan for some reason. So we tend to always have something to talk about. So I'm inclined to agree, my friend.
First, we're going to start with a Daily Detroit staple, where we've been. Norris, you went out to a food hall, and I'm a little jealous of you, but I need to know the 411.
Yeah, so I was able to go to the WhatChaWannaEat food hall out there on 6 Mile, for West McNichols, but we call it 6 Mile still. But out there on 6 Mile between Myers and Wyoming. It's across the street from a grocery store. And, it was a really interesting concept because it was put in one of those really sort of low ceiling commercial storefronts. And it was a very, very, very strange thing, I think, to see in the west side of Detroit, the northwest side of Detroit. However, it was pretty busy. It was a regular lunchtime, and the thing is this is not necessarily a super commercial, a super big area with offices everywhere. This is mostly a residential neighborhood, and 6 Mile serves as the commercial thoroughfare. There was a selection of things there to eat. There was ice cream place, couple wing spots, the food truck, Delectable, had a location there as well. And it was really cool. And it really reminded me, if anybody's ever been to East Asia, if you've ever been to like China, Japan, Singapore, Thailand, whatever, there are places where you have these sort of food court, food hall type areas that are like in the basements of apartment buildings or malls, and they're just very small and tight and compact. And, all the stuff is like in the middle, and you just go in and grab something at a kiosk and you walk out. It felt very much like that. There wasn't a lot of room to actually sit down and eat within the food hall. It definitely is a go in, pick up your food, and dip out.
I'm glad to see this as a Black-owned business. This is a big deal in the city of Detroit. And just from my seat, kind of being the editor and things, when I notice some changes, and I've noticed a change in that I get a lot more pitches from African-American businesses in the suburbs nowadays, Royal Oak, Farmington, things like that, than I do the city of Detroit. And so to see that in the city of Detroit, one, I think is a good thing. Also, I don't know if you have any comments on that trend that I think we're both seeing. People forget that there's a lot of people that actually live around where this place is.
Oh, yes.
And it's a place that you can just hop off the freeway and go to.
Yeah, I think specifically for that reason, I think it's pretty fantastic. I think the thing when we're talking about businesses in the city of Detroit is there's still so much trepidation about starting those businesses in the neighborhoods. I think the Bagley Fitzgerald Avenue of Fashion area, that sort of corridor really from the Lodge in the west and Woodward in the east and from 6 Mile north. That's a pretty solid series of neighborhoods that are well put together. A lot of families still there, still really dense. And I think there's some opportunities for success there. So I think seeing businesses pop up there is not a shock. But I think the density issue does raised a lot of questions for Black business owners, any business owners in the city of Detroit. And that's why you're starting to see a lot more businesses start in places like Royal Oak, Black-owned businesses, because you're getting stuff like the foot traffic, you're getting the density, you're getting, people who are just driving by and going, oh, what's that? And this is another reason why I think below ground highways are a great way to destroy a neighborhood. Because you don't have that element of just riding by and just going, oh wow, what is that place? Oh, that looks interesting. Let me come back here next week. You don't have that. So I think that's another big issue. But one thing I want to say about What You Want to Eat as before we move on is I plead out there with my Black brothers and sisters and native Detroiters out there. How many wing spots can we have? Right? That's what I really want to ask. Like, wings are great. I'm not a big fan of wings. I'm gonna be honest. I think it's a lot of work for not that much meat. But I was really kind of disappointed that there weren't more healthy options. There weren't more. There was nothing a vegan could get there, and that just continues to be disappointing. Understanding that we kind of in our communities have certain issues with obesity and hypertension and high blood pressure. It's just like, do we really need more wing spots? But I'm not a restaurant owner. Just a question, a little bit of food for thought.
So for me, I'm going to be heading to Chicago over the weekend. And I want to go check out something I haven't been to before, because coming to Sterling Heights is Jollibee, the Filipino-style fast food joint with the deep fried pies and the chicken and the spaghetti. Like, I'm not going to get all the things, but I'll probably try all the things because I want to get a little bit of a look ahead of when this place opens next month. And Chicago's a good place to do that. There's a couple places I'm going to check out that I know are coming to our area where I can get a little bit of food intelligence, if you will.
Yeah. I've actually been there in Los Angeles, or one of those mini cities that are in Los Angeles, LA County. But I've been before. Cool place. I think it's a good idea. Again, one of those things that just provides more flavor, more culture, just a different spin on what fast food can and should be. And I think it'll be a cool place for a lot of folks who've never experienced it out here in the Midwest. So I'm looking forward to it as well. But I also will be in Chicago this weekend, my friend.
Really?
Yeah, man. I'm going to check out Megan Rapinoe's last match at Soldier Field, checking out the U.S. women's national team take on South Africa. So that'll be super, super fun. I'm very excited. My wife's very excited. So maybe we'll link up out there.
Oh, that would be amazing. We should do a Daily Detroit Takes Over Chicago selfie.
Absolutely.
That's awesome. Let's get into a story that I think has been debated a lot online, but we really haven't had a lot of data about. We've had a lot of very strong opinions. And basically, what is it that is going to help keep people that are 18 to 29 years old in Michigan? There is a new statewide survey done by the Detroit Regional Chamber and Business Leaders Forum Michigan with the Glenn Gariff Group. And that they've been doing a series of studies, and I really appreciate them because we don't have that much polling around the region and the state right now because polling is expensive to do and it's difficult to do. And so this looks at some of the key findings here about what are the top priorities versus what a lot of people, like the noise that rises to the top. What are the top priorities that people 18 to 29 really have? And Norris, we both dive through this data. What are a couple of your first hot takes?
Yeah. So, this is a pretty comprehensive survey that they did. And one of the main findings is that while young people are generally optimistic about the economic outlooks of Michigan, there are a lot of sort of smaller and cultural issues that are getting people to not stay. And one of the huge ones, is the matter, I think, of women's choice. Abortion is a huge wedge issue, as they used to say back in the day. And over 60% of women surveyed said that is a major deciding factor on if they stay or leave in any given state. So Michigan protecting women's right to choose is a huge win for keeping women of all education levels and all economic levels in the state. That is one of the key findings from this thing, as well as LGBTQ people feeling protected in your state is something that is going to retain a lot of talent. On the flip side, over half, 54% of Black respondents, African American respondents, saw themselves, or only 55% saw themselves remaining in Michigan, with almost 40% saying they see themselves moving elsewhere, either in their lifetime or within the next 10 years. And I think that's very telling. And by the way, this is a statewide survey. This is not a Southeast Michigan or Detroit survey. But I think that's very telling given the Black population centers in Michigan. You look at Flint, you look at Saginaw, you look at Detroit, you look at Benton Harbor, a little bit of Kalamazoo, Grand Rapids you want to throw in there, Muskegon you could throw in there. A lot of these places are not necessarily in the greatest economic and professional situations that they could be in. And therefore, if you are Black in the state of Michigan, Atlanta looks a lot more attractive to you. Washington, D.C. looks a lot more attractive to you. Houston, Philadelphia, these places look more attractive to you than staying in the state of Michigan. I think it is critical that the state looks at this survey and see what is going on with Black residents and trying to figure out how they could do more to get them to stay in the state of Michigan.
And it's a huge gap. People sometimes get mad. We're like, why'd you make it racial? Because it is. The gap in the life experiences of those two groups are absolutely different. I will also mention the gun control issue, like very much for enforcing the gun laws that we have. Like this is a very, it's a progressive shift, 100% among younger people, that they do not want to stay in areas that are conservative. I mean, it just looks like that because when it comes to women's rights, it's about the right to choose. Like it's about pro-choice. It's not a wedge issue in that, some people feel one way, some people feel another. It's very strongly, this state needs to have and support women's rights or else I'm gone.
Yeah, 1,000%. And it's shocking when you see even how other people react to those cultural shifts, right? When you're looking at out-of-towners, those who were not born in Michigan, because the vast majority of the people surveyed here who have family in Michigan or are from Michigan see themselves staying there. But when you talk to people who are non-native Michiganders, only half saw themselves staying in this state. So we're not attracting and bringing in people who have the talent, have the education, have, and let's even take education out of it, but who have the desire to move to a place like Michigan and want to stay here and raise a family here. And that's how you grow population. And I think that's really telling for me, because if I grew up, in a suburb of Chicago, or I grew up in a suburb of Houston or Dallas or Denver, I look at a place like Michigan and I'm not seeing the same level of diversity. I'm not seeing the same level of economic growth. I'm not seeing the same level of occupational opportunity. And I think that is going to be a huge thing moving forward. And while women's rights is really, really critical to that, and I think over the next few years, we may actually see a bump in women moving to the state of Michigan, especially from the surrounding states. I'm not sure if the other aspects of Michigan, given our industries, are bringing in people who want to stay here based on this survey.
There's a couple of crosstabs I want to talk about. One, it's that the more educated you are, the more interested you are in moving. Because if you just have a high school diploma, you tend to be pretty happy. If you tend to be more conservative, you're pretty happy with some of the things that, was saying as far as that you want to stay. And the other point, and this I think is driving a lot of this conversation, a huge portion of people, I think it's more than 17, 18% of people who are saying like, hey, this is not a great place that I don't want to be. It's in that creative and broadcasting field. And I think those fields help set the conversation. And I think there's a big gap between that and, the creatives and the artists. And, it's so funny to me because I think about folks like Richard Florida who've been here 1,000 times in the creative class. It's that creative class, and they're the ones feeling the least interested in staying here. And I admit that probably that changes some of my prism as a lifelong media professional, whether it's communications, working way back in the day as a floor manager at Channel 4 News. Like I see that, and I wonder if my prism's a little adjusted by that. But I also think it's really important because creatives and creators, whether it's media, whether it's Instagram, social media, that helps drive some of that discussion. And so I think it's important to make sure that those groups are on board and that there are things to support that. And that's why, and Norris, you and I have talked about this off air. I've got a lot of designs and plans for projects to kind of help support that community because, and maybe on a smaller scale, but that's really important in order to keep that creative energy here.
Absolutely. And I think also when you talk about the revitalization, especially of the city of Detroit, it stemmed from the creative class. People, again, I've told this story before on the show, but when you look at the rebirth of Detroit, quote unquote, in the wake of the recession, it came from the creative class. It came from a bunch of kids from Wayne State and CCS not leaving Midtown, staying there, contributing to things like D-Electricity and Detroit Design Festival and Dally in the Alley, and completely revitalizing the area with energy and events. That then created an interest in the city itself, plus the narrative around the city. And now we have the situation where downtown Detroit is experiencing 25% growth over the past decade. It is a very interesting look into how these things happen. And if you're not supporting that creative class, then you essentially eviscerate the lifeblood of a city, the culture, the thing that makes people want to move to where you to where you live. New York is objectively a terrible place to live in. You get a shoebox apartment, it's dirty, it smells, there's rats everywhere, and it's not exactly the safest place on earth. But the culture and the lifestyle of New York City is so attractive, and it is so magical to people that they will move. Doesn't matter what kind of place they live in, they'll go. And that comes from New York being this hustle place, having a culture, having a creative class that has never left. You talk about the music and fashion industries. New York will always be that way. And Atlanta is that way now as well.
3 other industries I want to mention really quick: medical or medical studies, the service industry, which obviously we all know is a big part of the Detroit conversation, and education and behavior. Those 3 things together are more than the performing arts and the creatives. All 4 of those things are things that I think are really talked about a lot as areas we need to focus on. And I can see from this data for good reason. Now, there's more to this that is interesting before we go on it. One, up comes safety again as one of the top priorities.
Oh my gosh. Listen, I'm going to shout this from the rooftops, and people don't want to keep not wanting to listen to me. And listen, everybody deserves to feel safe. But when we look at they have a section that says the 12 factors that go into why people stay or leave somewhere, particularly as it pertains to Michigan. Low cost of rent and housing, which is true, lower than the national average, and low crime rates. So for everywhere else besides our population centers, crime is relatively low. You live in a safe place. If you live in Farmington Hills, you probably are a very safe person, not worried very much about crime. But look at when we talk about the amount of African Americans who want to leave the state. They live in these major cities that have issues with crime. Why would they want to stay? And I'm not trying to say this to be down on the city. I'm a native of the city. I am probably as far away from law and order Republican as you can be, but I also understand the fundamental need to want to be safe. And if people are saying that is in our top three, the top three from young people, these are not old fogies who are sitting around watching a Ring camera all day. These are young people saying low cost of housing, low crime rates, and the affordability and availability of higher education. Those are the three largest issues. And by the way, just so we can even just remove ourselves a little bit from our Southeast Michigan, Metro Detroit bubble, public transportation isn't even in the top 5 here.
Here's my challenge. So I was at an event earlier this week, and I've been talking on background, trying to get some more things around this topic. And it's really clear to me that one of the reasons why we don't have a bus deal for those bus drivers is because there isn't that much public pressure being put on them to pay them more. Like,
no,
they're not feeling the heat. And so here's the deal. I think a lot of people support public transit as an idea. The problem in Metro Detroit and the city of Detroit, to be very honest with you, is that when it comes to spending more money, I love the idea. I don't want to pay for it.
Yeah, flat out.
That's the challenge. What you pay for shows me your priorities. And if you don't want to pay for it, like, the idea for most people for the suburbs is smart is regional transit. I think an RTA is going to have a lot of trouble passing like additional millages. Yeah. And it's very telling to me that you see the queue line, and this will tie into a future episode that we're doing on the show about the size of downtowns and stuff. You see the queue line's funding shift to tourism funding. And I think that's actually a really smart move because in reality, that's the market that they're serving. And I think I'm changing my thoughts around this. I used to be a queue line to 8 Mile person. I don't think it's ever happening.
No.
I think what's going to happen is that you're going to see it go out into neighborhoods east and west in certain areas when it eventually expands to create density as a tourism magnet, as a density accelerator, and as something to create more reasons to be in a certain area.
And by the way, that's just really, in my opinion, just a better way to conceptualize it, because you're still going to have to deal with the how do we go through Highland Park. I'm just being honest. But if the queue line extends to Southwest Detroit and then extends maybe out to Belle Isle or all the way out to the points, dude, it's, at this point, that's more than we can ask for. I hate to be that pessimistic about it, but that's what it's gonna be about. If you could take a queue line to Belle Isle, man, that'd be sweet for a lot of tourists.
For sure. And residents will end up using it. But if you think about and we'll get into this in a future episode, but what actually drives the economy, I have really been looking more and more at it. It's like, well, if you've only got 6,000 residents in downtown Detroit, like I learned at a recent thing, your money's coming from the million people that come in there every year for your sports ball, and you're more than 1 million people for your sports ball, for your theater acts, for your concerts like this. You got to look at where the money actually comes from. And when you see that, then you realize, oh, no wonder these certain companies are getting, like, people say they're getting away with stuff. It's because it's what they're doing is paying the bills.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a really hard thing emotionally for me to wrap around. But, you look at things like late night spots. It's really hard to justify a late night spot in a small town of 6,000.
And that's what downtown is.
Yeah.
A
downtown with a small town with tall buildings. And that will be a future episode.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I just think we got to start being a lot more realistic about it. Now, that's not to say that these things won't improve, because as we see from this survey, people feel optimistic, and that's all you need sometimes is hope. And if people have hope, that means they'll be willing to take a chance. And it seems like the young people in Michigan are willing to take a chance on Michigan. And let's do everything that we can to get these people to stay. Let's make sure that people's rights are protected. Let's make sure they feel safe. Let's make sure that they have job opportunities. And let's make sure that they have a vibrant arts community that they can participate in. We have those 4 or 5 things, then really sky's the limit. From there, we'll be able to achieve whatever it is that we want to achieve.
Before we go, a Michigan House panel, now that's the state legislature, voted 9-1 to allow the idea that counties could basically have a new property tax for historical museums. This would help fund the Charles H. Wright and the Detroit Historical Museum, which are in desperate financial shape in a lot of ways. A lot of deferred maintenance, a lot of issues. This is something we've been talking about since the Mackinac Policy Conference. Only Oakland and Wayne County at this point would be up for a possible vote for this, right? So if the state approves this, that would mean that there would be an allowance to put this on the ballot in those two counties. Macomb is out. So there's a back and forth on this. A lot of northern Oakland County doesn't feel like they should support it. Some in southern Oakland County feel like they do. And without this funding, I think both of those institutions are going to be in a lot of trouble, Norris.
Yeah, I mean, we've had millages for the DIA, to keep it free, as I alluded to earlier. And, having this money, the Charles H. Wright has basically said in a statement to CBS that they got about $25 million of maintenance that they just haven't been able to do because the building is old and they just have no money. And it really makes me it makes me sort of sad because having the Charles H. Wright has always been a jewel, I think, in the crown of the city of Detroit. It's been an attraction that people can come from nationwide and worldwide to see. Its exhibit on slavery is world renowned. And I'm not saying that just as a native to be euphemistic. It's literally won awards for how gripping and how riveting it is and how immersive it is. And so this is something that I think, most of Metro Detroit, and when I say that, I mean Wayne County and the southern half of Oakland County, which is where most of the population lives. Most of Metro Detroit will want to support these places. They understand their significance. They understand their importance. My issue with anybody taking issue with it, because by the way, I don't think anybody will care. We're talking about fractions of cents of each property tax dollar. You will very rarely notice this in your property tax bills. That's how small it would be. But what I have issue with this is why you wouldn't want to support it. If you're somebody who's saying the museums are in Detroit and therefore we shouldn't support it, that's dumb. Because for me, when you're talking about the culture of a region, you're talking about the culture of a place, you need to have these institutions in, kids got to take field trips to them to see what the history is. People come from out of town to see these things. You think that doesn't affect you? I think that's silly.
So I've waxed poetic about the Historical Museum before. I of course, agree with all your points. I don't want to leave the Historic Museum out. I've waxed poetic about them before. I feel like this points to me a problem in how we are set up as a region, and I wonder if we need to come up with a creative way to address it. So I get it. If you're out in I don't know, way out there, Romeo. Or something, right? I get that feeling. The problem is that the center of our region between southern Macomb County, southern Oakland County, and eastern Wayne County is split among 3 counties. When I've traveled around, what I've learned is that you have a county government that kind of helps handle a lot of these issues, but it's centered geographically. Here, we have 3 different stakeholders with vastly different parts that we have to constantly negotiate with. And I wonder, and this is crazy, but do we need to come up with an alternate taxing authority for the urbanized area of Metro Detroit? Do we need to redraw our lines for projects like this where it's like, you know what, if you live out in, I don't know,
maybe you shouldn't care. I think that would be intelligent because yes, the folks who live in Ferndale have much more of a stake in what is happening in the city of Detroit than somebody in Lake Orion. So I get it, but also to me at the same time though, and here's where I will give pushback on that. Is that I also have an understanding that I'm generally able to live out in these areas because there's opportunity which is flowed from the population center. And that is just how populations work, okay? So if you live in the suburbs, it is typically because you or your parents or somebody has worked very hard in a population center and then bought a house somewhere out in the boonies, and now you just grow up out there, right? So for me, when we talk about regional participation and we talk about all this stuff, all of these towns, all of these cities have an understanding that if the city collapses, we in big trouble. If Chicago all of a sudden financially collapsed, that entire region is in big trouble. Same thing for, DC, Baltimore, same thing for obviously, New York, any population center. If it fails, the rest of the region is in big trouble. We are one of the only places in the country in which the suburbs feel a genuine independence from the city. I find that strange. So for me, when we're talking about stuff like this, it comes off, if you have an issue with this, it comes off way more that you're just okay with the evisceration of culture. And that, to me, is steeped in, this larger national conversation of culture war, more than it has anything to do with the 0.35 cents you'll pay a month to pay for something like this. It ain't about the tax. Let's be honest, Jared. It's not about the tax.
But I want to get things done.
I feel you.
I look at it and go, it's time to get things done. And when it comes to getting things done, you're making a choice to, like, when you move that far out, you are making an active choice to disconnect.
That's true.
Right? If you're on the very edge of it, and at the end of the day, how else are we going to get something like a Woodward spine that goes up and down Woodward, a true BRT, or maybe even, I feel like if you had some sort of authority that made more geographic sense, maybe you would get light rail up Woodward, because that's what I hear is like the back and forth on this thing. And I know that people want to include the most area because of whatever dollars and increasing dollars, but I think we need to relook at, like, I don't disagree with a lot of what you're saying. I really don't. But at the end of the day, if we keep playing that game and just do a finger wag, that's not going to get anything done because everything's just going to stay locked.
But then if that's the case, the people in the population centers in Oakland and Macomb County have to care about that. And right now, they've shown that they don't. So if we're talking to the people in Farmington and Southfield and Warren and all these other places, show me, vote, change the personnel, change the leadership. Because what I've seen so far and through the vast majority of my life is that these people talk a good game about what regional participation should be in Southeast Michigan, but they don't vote that way. So as far as I know, Jared, what you're saying, I think is a fantastic idea, but where's the political will to do it? Because that's not what they're saying in the voting booth.
I would love your thoughts. dailydetroit@gmail.com, 313-789-3211. Norris Howard, always spirited, always good to talk with you.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was a jam-packed show.
You can follow Norris on social media, Great Laker Nori, and all the places. And of course, we're at Daily Detroit on Instagram, TikTok, and things. We had a really big TikTok over the weekend. I can't believe it, man.
Really?
162,000 views as of this.
I am literally at the cutoff point for being too old for TikTok, man. I just watch it and I just get sad.
Do you feel like the old guy in the club?
Yeah. Oh, man, the worst feeling in the world being the old guy in the club.
With that, I am Jer Stays. Thank you so much for listening. Remember that you are somebody, and we'll see you around Detroit.